This honestly feels like not just good advice for Blades in the Dark, but like good advice for every role-playing game ever. Welcome back to Dicey Encounters. Today we're going to go through the best player advice that I have ever read. So there is a game in the works called Blades 68, and it is a Blades in the Dark clone or sort of spiritual successor, if you like, set in the same setting but moved ahead to sort of a 1960s style setting. It's very cool. Recently they released their take on the player's advice section for their rulebook, and a lot of games have these, especially story games. But I think these ones for Blades 68 really encapsulate the best advice you could get for running a game like this. So without further ado, let's just get into it. Let's just go through these one at a time. So the first one, go in, boots and all. The campaign will be shorter than you think. Make stuff happen now. Don't wait. Pull the trigger. Yeah, this is really good, and it's a great one to start off with as well. As the kind of first piece of advice, it really needs to be the one that encapsulates all of the rules and the whole idea that you want the players to go away with. If they take away one thing, it's this. And I think they've done a really good job here of working out that some issues that arrive from play may be dragging, or campaigns taking a bit longer, or games not feeling that exciting, is because there may be players who feel like they don't want to take those risks just yet. They need to see the lay of the land. They need to make sure they understand the rules. They need to keep their character alive. They don't want them to die in the first turn. But this is saying, just jump in, see what happens. It'll be fine. It'll be fun. And this sort of starts to kind of tease the overall thrust, I think, of these player practices. And it is about jumping in and just going with your gut, really, and just doing what you think is going to be cool and exciting and fun. And I know that there's a bit of a pushback with this kind of sort of behavior, especially when, you know, we think of players who don't think before they act. We think of them as kind of people who sort of only think about themselves, and they sort of ruin campaigns by being annoying. But I think maybe we've gone too much the other way, where players are really cautious and want to do things by consensus. But with these story games, it's more fun for the characters to act a bit irrationally as well, because there are mechanics in place for there to be like checks and balances. You can say that you do crazy stuff, but you need to trust the game is not going to let you, jump off a cliff. So let's move on to number 2. Dig the other characters. Dial in on the other player characters. Pay attention to their narrative and get your own character involved. Be their fan or be their foil. Ooh. Again, really solid advice, and not something that I actually hear that often, that spelled out. Sometimes you see the people saying, or you see rulebooks saying, be a fan of the other characters. You see the GM being told to be a fan of the players. But this is something that I've written about in blogs that I've written, is that especially in these story games, the players need to also act kind of like GMs as well. They need to be adding to the narrative. And one of the big complaints about that is as well, I don't want to have to constantly think about new things to come up with. I have to be constantly creative. But if you're bouncing off the other players, you can share the load. It's also like the player characters are the things that are driving the story forward. So if you're bouncing off each other's characters, that is creating the story. That's making the story better. Even if you're, as it says here, their foil, if you and another player have this kind of rivalry, a lot of drama and exciting moments and sort of fun moments can come from that. But if you're not really focusing on what the other characters are doing, then maybe you won't even pick up on that. And again, maybe another player has a narrative moment with their character, and it would make sense for your characters to also lean in on that. Think about ensemble groups of characters, Guardians of the Galaxy, whatever. They don't just let Rocket Raccoon have his moment in a silo. They kind of get involved. They talk to him about it. They try and help him with it, right? Right, let's move on to number 3. Make the GM sweat. Now, this is my least favorite one of this, mostly because I imagine a lot of players will read this and they will focus on this and they'll say, look, I'm doing the thing that you told me to do. I'm making you sweat. And you're going to have to say, no, remember the other things. You can't just do 1 in 5. So it says, think of the game like a physics toy. Push levers you have as hard as you can just to see what happens. Rattle the cage, jump out the window, don't look down. Move so fast the GM can't keep up. So it's very similar to the first one, but it's more about how you're interacting with the game, as the mechanics. And I think what happens when players do this, when they push boundaries, 9 times out of 10, I think they get rewarded for it and they discover stuff that they didn't realize was possible. I think when you're a GM as a player, you already treat the whole thing as a physics toy, so you know where a lot of the boundaries are, like the really far out boundaries of the game system. And then if you're a player character only, maybe you're only staying in this one box. Again, this evokes ideas of players being like, oh, I just killed the guy, I just killed the prisoner, I shoot the guy in the head, I kill the NPC, whatever it is, which can make a lot of people nervous. But again, I think games like Blades, they have checks and balances for that kind of thing. And also if you practice things like looking for trouble, you should probably be getting other players' consent for that anyway. This doesn't necessarily mean go crazy and just do crazy things, even if it ruins the game. I think this means doing stuff as a group, especially. And if you're worried that the GM didn't think of that or hasn't prepared for that, like, it doesn't matter. This game doesn't expect the GM to know what's happening. And in fact, I actually like it when the players surprise me and do interesting things. Right, number 4, sell the punches. Always choose the bigger reaction. Let your character be changed by the world and by the other characters. Let them be upset, emotional, irrational. I love that they chose the words upset, emotional, and irrational, because these are the things I think that players tend to avoid as much as possible. Mostly because people don't, when they want to play D&D for fun, they don't want to roleplay someone having their heart ripped out, right? They also don't want to play someone who's emotionally vulnerable because you're a group of psycho murder hobo killers. We're taught as a society, if you're vulnerable, then that just leaves you open to ridicule. But I think irrational is a really good one, because everyone can do, because in films and TVs and books and video games and whatever, characters are irrational. They do things based on their emotions, and we scream at the TV and we say, "Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? Why does the person in the scary film go to the basement? Why do they do it?" One, because there wouldn't be a film if they didn't do it. There wouldn't be a story. They would just leave. But secondly, because people who are terrified and incredibly emotional and going through lots of crazy stuff, they do crazy things, right? And it's easy to sit around a table as 4 rational people and say, well, would you really do that? Would you really have done that? But I really advocate for players to say, out of character, look, guys, I think my character would do this, or they would be tempted to do this thing because X, Y, Z. And even if it's a not very good reason, you can always say, I think it would also be more fun. And also let your character be changed by the world and by the other characters. You can write a backstory. That stuff can be set in stone, but don't turn up expecting your character to stay the same throughout the whole campaign. If you play a D&D campaign, you get to level 12 and your paladin is still the same guy he was all that time ago from starting an adventure, then that's not going to be that fun or interesting. Again, let them be changed by the other characters. Maybe the chaotic neutral rogue makes the paladin think again about his strict virtues. Maybe him seeing how the world works in reality makes him rethink his strict values. That change, that character development, that arc, is the most unique and interesting thing about this hobby. So yeah, selling the punches, I think, really, really great. Number 5, fuck around and find out, right? It's continuing this same theme that we've been talking about. If your character dies, they can come back as an echo. If they have to retire, you can always make a new character. The crew cannot be stopped. Act first and think later. Make bad decisions. Let the chips fall where they may. I think this one is maybe a bit superfluous if you're reading as much as I am into the other ones. It's really good to come out and be explicit about these things. If you say in the player guidance, make bad decisions, then it's there in black and white and a player can point to it when the rest of his group is telling him off for doing it. Also, what's interesting here is it doesn't say when characters die, they die and they're gone. It says they can come back as an echo. It says they can retire. You can make a new character, but they're still there in the world. You don't have to say goodbye to them if you really enjoy this character. And I think that's something that I've been trying to do, or thinking about more and more, especially when playing games like Pirate Borg, where character death is is always present, the threat of it, right? if the player's really enjoying that character and it's the reason they're turning up week after week, maybe there should be ways for them to keep doing that. Change them, don't delete them. Act first and think later. Again, we've covered that. Make bad decisions. Let the chips fall where they may. And that goes into that Blades thing of, let's just start the score. We can always flash back if we need to. And you probably won't flash back as much as you feel like you were gonna, because flying by the seat of your pants is fun. And finally, learn to stop worrying and love consequences, like basically what we were just talking about. Most roles are going to have consequences. Wouldn't it be boring to succeed all the time? Embrace consequences and create consequences, then roll them up in a giant ball of chaos and surf on top. So this is very specific to Forged in the Dark games, the fact that on a roll of a 4 to a 5, a 1 to a 5, you will generate consequences for your actions, even if you succeed on a 4 or 5. In my Blades campaign, there were some scores where the players rolled an enormous amount of 6s, which meant success with no consequences. And it felt very strange for the whole heist to kind of go off without a hitch, like everything they wanted to do, they did. And it kind of felt like, from a GM's perspective, it was a bit like I'd been cheated. But then I thought, but the players are so happy. The players are so impressed with themselves, and they're buzzing off the fact that they just look like complete badasses on this heist. And I think it's definitely great when that happens every now and again. So yes, it is boring to succeed all the time. So I think consequences are always great. And playing Pirate Borg at the minute, I am even doing that a little bit. So it's not just a Blades thing. You can, if you're playing a D20 game and some players fail at rolls, you can always introduce consequences. My player in Pirate Borg was swimming down towards a shipwreck in the middle of the ocean, and he failed on his kind of swimming investigation roll kind of thing. And so that's when I decided that the sharks would arrive on the scene, and that made it more interesting. It turned it into a combat. They had to choose whether they would risk fighting to get more of the loot, or they would go back, or whatever it is. And as a player, you shouldn't kind of piss and moan when that kind of stuff happens from failure, because imagine you're watching a film. Next time you watch a film, think about how many times the main characters don't get what they want and they fail at what they're doing. It makes the successes afterwards that much sweeter. And then finally, you can see that they have tied these player best practices mechanically into the game. This is the first time I've seen a game reward players for carrying out this advice. It says, any time you feel any other player has followed one of the 6 principles above, mark a box. And you can see there are 15 boxes, and it says when you've marked all 15, ball up this paper and throw it at the GM. Then everyone on the crew marks 2 XP. And this is really good, because throughout it we've said about supporting each other and making sure that we encourage each other to do these things and not hold each other back. And here it's saying, and here is a perfect mechanical advantage, even for these kind of very gamey type people, to do these things. We all benefit when someone decides to buy into someone else's narrative, or learns to love or embraces a consequence. And I think what's going to be really common is that you'll have groups that either just don't vibe with this and this mostly gets forgotten, or you'll have groups that through this learn to do it, and then eventually you've gotten to a point where it's becoming habits and you're not really doing the ticking the boxes thing after maybe 10 sessions or whatever it is, but the game has been increased as a result, so it's done its job. The end goal for this is not to give players more XP and to level them up and make them stronger. It is about imbibing these great habits and creating that sort of atmosphere at your table that personifies these 6 things. And that is it. That is the 6 principles from Blades 68. It's going to be a really cool game. I can't wait to play it. I think it's coming out next year. But tell me, what did you think? Do you think this is something that your group would ever be interested in doing? Do you feel like you do it already? Is this something that, do you feel like it's gone too far? Do you think it's not gone far enough? For me, I think this is something that should be included in every session 0, or even just shared with players and just sort of percolated through their brains, just to say, this is what we want. This is what we're aiming for. And that is all from me for today. Until next time, see you then.